All right, guys. This is Slavic Friendly Evangelist. Sorry, guys, I had a kind of some error in the setup, but I'm starting the video right now. Let me know if you guys are in the chat right now and can hear the audio. I know some of you guys were waiting, but I had to restart the stream. So let me know if you guys hear the audio and if everything's going well. So guys, my name's Slavic Friendly Evangelist. If you've been following me, I'm a missionary and evangelist, originally from Ukraine. Did ministry there, and then God brought me to do ministry back in America in Arizona, and I do lots of evangelism and street preaching. And part of my story is I got saved when I was a young kid from Ukraine, kind of like Wesley Huff got saved as a young kid. Of course, I'm not PhD like him, but I've studied apologetics and Christianity, evidence for it, against it, and I knew, I had family members growing up that told me basic Christianity was a farce and myth, kind of like the popular YouTube streamer Myth Vision, Derek Lambert, and Gnostic Informant. I was told Christianity was Gnosticism, and all these things. And Oprah, The Secret, we didn't know what Jesus said. Jesus went to Tibet, and all these like myths about Jesus. We know nothing about Jesus except what we are taught from the Bible, really. So the thing is about Wesley Home Joe Rogan interview, it's very actually powerful, but it's also very like powerful to me because as somebody who studied so much evidence for Christianity and against it, and through my evangelism career, I've met so many people who said different things about Jesus. I um, I kind of am amazed how God is now bringing apologetics. Um, Let me know, just a second. Let me know if you can hear me. Okay, let me know, guys, if you can hear me. If you can't, let me know because I don't want to play the video if you guys can't hear me. But anyway, so this episode was really cool. I've been following Wesley Huff for a long time. Long time. I mean, like 3 years, maybe 2 to 3 years. So before he blew up with Billy Carson and Joe Rogan, I've known him for a while. Studied a lot of his stuff. So it's pretty neat to see how Wes blew up after the Billy Carson debate, and I did a debate about Wesley Huff and Billy Carson video also that took off. So praise God for that. So right now, I thought it's pretty cool that a lot of people were saying, well, there's no way Wesley and when Joe Rogan, but he did. And I just want to do it live, guys, to play for everybody that will be watching it tonight. If you guys want to join this awesome live chat party, then do it because the Holy Spirit's here for sure. God the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. Oh, the anti-Trinitarians don't like that. No, I'm just kidding. But so yeah, so we're gonna play the Joe Rogan debate. Now, Joe Rogan's not a Christian. He's not saved. He swears. He doesn't swear as much here as the other episodes because I've listened to a little bit. So forgive me if there is swearing. It's Joe Rogan, not me, not Wes. And I think Wes is kind of a little uncomfortable sometimes, but he's nice to Joe. And let's pray that Joe Rogan gets saved because he actually gets shocked in one of the moments. You'll see it's pretty amazing, but he gets pretty shocked at what happens. So this is going to be an awesome interview. So guys, I'll try to get rid of the cursing as much as I can. But again, it's Rogan. He's not saved, so he doesn't have the Holy Spirit. But this is awesome that God brought Wesley Huff to Joe Rogan because Wesley does share the gospel fully, and you guys will see that. So without further ado, let's get started. Let me know if the audio is good, and whoever's here, let everyone else know tonight. We're gonna have Joe Rogan's gonna hear about Jesus party, and we're gonna hear about the true evidence for the Bible. And people like Gnostic Foreman, Myth Vision are gonna be destroyed because they hate Christianity. They think all the apologists lie to them. They think the Sinai Bible's liars and everyone. But it's like, but the thing is that there's so much evidence for Christianity, so much circumstantial evidence, so much miraculous evidence. So you guys will see that. All right, let's get started. And you guys, if you want to share the stream, definitely share the stream too.
Yeah,
you had with Billy Carson,
quote unquote.
It's one of those things where it's very unfortunate when people get caught with their pants down. And I'm not an expert in many things, but the things that I am an expert on, you could wake me up at 4 o'clock in the morning and ask me about those things, and I go, "Oh yeah, no,
Yeah,
this is what it is."
yeah.
I know, like martial arts or comedy. I could give you an expert version of reality.
Uh huh.
It seems like he does not have that, and he is a wonderful talker, and it's a lot of fun. I like watching his videos. I love all that ancient history stuff, and even the most ridiculous tinfoil hat aspects of ancient. It's fun.
It's entertainment.
But I know that there's a different, like Andrew Schultz and I had a discussion about this. Like he said when he had Billy on the podcast, he said, we're not going to fucking research anything. We're not going to search anything. Just let him talk because it's fun.
Yeah.
Andrew's awesome. But when he was on with you, it was quite apparent that you are an actual expert in.
Really quick, guys, I'm gonna have to comment throughout the video, so don't get mad at me. I'm not trying to interrupt, but it's because for it not to be copyrighted, I have to interrupt. So yes, if here's some interruptions. If I have to skip, it's because of language or commercial. So don't get mad at me. I'm just the messenger.
The Bible and in many religious texts, and that he didn't necessarily have the facts straight. So
Yeah.
what was the fallout of all of that?
Well, it's interesting you say the expert thing, because I literally was asked to do it 24 hours beforehand. So I had like the least amount of preparation going into it, and I was okay with that because I'd listened to Billy Carson. Well, and I'd listened to the stuff he'd said. So I knew enough about the ways that he'd articulated things about the ancient Near East and the Bible and Christianity to know enough that his level is pretty surface. But the fallout was that not only did he not want us to release the conversation, but then he started throwing out cease and desist letters, and then he started, trying to sue people. So, I mean, I was never worried because I'm a Canadian, and anybody who's tried to sue internationally knows that.
Good luck.
Yeah, right. Yeah. As far as I understand it, he would have had to file a claim in a Canadian court that would have been reviewed to have legal precedence. That he'd have to prove that he could win.
What was his argument?
Apart from the fact that he was embarrassed that he lost?
Well, yeah, that's not really an argument, right? We've all been there. You're hungover, thinking about all the dumb stuff you did last night and wondering if anybody remembers. Unfortunately, someone does remember everything you private. It's incredibly fast. It doesn't slow down. Get 4.
Anton, who...
Can you actually say no?
No, you can't do it.
So what was the? Does he have a lawyer that wrote the cease and desist? Is he a
Yeah.
lawyer?
No. So he actually, it's interesting because Mark Menard, who was the guy who hosted this interaction, he sent Mark a handwritten one, and then he eventually gave Mark an official one from his lawyer. So I actually was sent one by his lawyer, which I screenshotted, posted publicly online, and said, I'm going to ignore this. And then, but he'd sent Mark, who was the podcast host, as far as I'm aware, numerous cease and desists, and Anton, who was the media manager. He'd sent a number of cease and desists.
It's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate.
When you get caught with your pants down, you're supposed to say, I got caught with my pants down.
Yeah.
That's what you're supposed to do. Like,
Yeah.
It's the only, especially if you're public, like it's very clear that you're.
That's true. That kind of shows us like Billy Carson could have easily just said, "Hey, I blew it, guys. Okay, let's have another debate." I mean, the pride of that man. It's like God had to break him. It was just so obvious.
Incorrect.
Well, the irony of this situation is if he just kind of left it, it probably wouldn't have made anywhere close to the splash
No.
that it's made. And we told him that. We said, like, hey, Barbra Streisand effect
Yeah.
is going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, you're a big enough personality that if I make a video and say, like, hey, I had this conversation, didn't go well for Billy, and Billy doesn't want it released, that's going to start to gain traction sooner or later.
Yeah. It's, the problem is to really delve into these subjects. It takes a tremendous amount of research, years and years and years of research. You really have to know what you're talking about. Most of us don't.
Well, and especially with languages.
Yes.
Like, we didn't get into it. I hoped to have, in our initial conversation, kind of press him a little bit more on the more overt things he'd said about, like, Greek and Hebrew and Sumerian, because I've studied a number of ancient languages, and when you study the languages, you realize the complexities of these things. And so when someone hasn't and they're making statements that are obviously indicative of someone who hasn't studied them, it's super apparent.
Right.
And so I think it's one thing to be making claims about, say, like Christian history or the Bible, but when you start to get into like linguistics and philology, it gets messy. And if you don't know what you're talking about, it gets really apparent really fast.
So the gentleman who brought the two of you together, what was his goal? Like, what was he trying to do, and how did he approach you?
Yeah, so he's friends, or I should say was friends. He was friends with Billy. They live in the same neighborhood.
Oh, boy.
So it's actually become really, it's become pretty rough for him. So he released a video yesterday, which I think people should go and check out, where he kind of gives his perspective. He's been friends with Billy for years. He was at Billy's wedding.
Oof.
Billy had 15 people at his wedding.
Oof.
Mark was one of them. And they live in this community in Florida. Their sons are friends. Their wives would hang out.
Oof.
And Mark told me, he's like, I've been hearing Billy say, you know, he wants to debate. Nobody will debate him for years. And so as far as I think Mark was concerned, he was giving Billy the opportunity that Billy had told a lot of people he wanted.
Right.
And so he, you know, this was set up in that Mark and Billy have been talking. They've been on each other's podcasts in the past, and they've been friends, but more like business colleagues. Like Mark has come out and said, I hadn't really gone into the stuff he'd said about Christianity or ancient religions or whatever that much. Mark is he's a Christian. He has like a public profession of faith, and him and
For those of you guys who are unaware, Mark Menard is the original interview moderator, or he doesn't like to call himself moderator, but he was the guy who made the interview happen with Billy and Wesley Huff. So let's give props to that guy. God used him. He's not perfect. I don't know how generally he is saved. He does profess to be a Christian. But yeah, Mark is definitely a very emotional kind of guy, and so he got really attacked by Billy at 2 a.m. in the morning when Billy sued him for this debate. It's kind of incredible what happened.
Billy had talked about the fact that they wanted to talk about like faith stuff and some of their differences, and that that Mark was kind of prepping for this, and his media manager Anton had sent him some of my stuff and said, like, Wes has done some stuff on some things that Billy has talked about, and you know, maybe you should look up some of this stuff, you know, read into it. And Mark, very last minute, was like, well, I feel inadequate. Do you think I could just ask Wes? And so he DM'd me on Instagram and just kind of laid this out like, hey, I'm going to have Billy in my studio in 24 hours. I can tell him you're coming, can tell him who you are. I can like give him your background, but would you be willing to come? And so that's what I did. And so that's how it got set up.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but was Billy aware that this was going to be a debate, or did he think it was going to be just a discussion? Like, what did he think it was going to be?
No, he'd been given all of the prerequisites. Like, he knew we're going to go over some of his stuff that he'd said about Christianity, that I was going to come in, who I was, what my name was, some of my background, and that part of the conversation was going to be me kind of asking him some clarifying questions and rebutting some of the things that he said. So you didn't watch the 3-hour live stream that he did you?
I watched chunks of it.
Okay.
I watched a little bit. I'm like, oof, and then I shut it off. Then I watched a little bit more. Oof.
Yeah. So unfortunately, Billy there says he had no idea going in. And I mean, as Mark said in his video that he released yesterday, I mean, that's patently false. He knew what it was going to be, who was going to be involved, and even some of the things that we would be talking about.
Okay. And he also was claiming that it wasn't a debate, that he had been involved in debates before, and that he would prepare for debates, but this is something he didn't prepare. But again, it's like, if you ask me about things that I know about, you can wake me up out of a full sleep and give me a couple seconds. I'll go, oh, okay. This is what it is.
Yeah.
If you know, you know.
And it wasn't a debate in one sense. Like, it wasn't. Like, we didn't do, you know, opening statements and cross-examination and rebuttal.
Right.
It really was a conversation.
Right.
And it only kind of turned into a debate in the sense that Billy, I think, got caught out. And so the things that were talked about kind of showed that, that he needed to go on the offense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's all very unfortunate, but the good part of it is I was introduced to you and your work. And
there you go.
Very, very extensive and very fascinating. And the videos that you sent me on Instagram, I watched both of those today as well.
Awesome.
So really, really interesting stuff. And your knowledge of the history of the biblical texts and the Codex Sinaiticus and all these different things, very, very fascinating stuff. So let's just get into your background. Like, how did you get started in your research, and how did you get into this?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home. My parents were missionaries. So I was born in Pakistan and spent a portion of my childhood in the Middle East, with my parents working in Amman, Jordan. And then we came back from the Middle East when I was pretty young. And so I grew up in this very diverse home, in the sense that my mom was a missionary kid who grew up in India. And so we had a lot of worldview kind of perspectives represented in our home. Like, I often say we had the Bhagavad Gita and the Book of Mormon and the Quran on the shelf.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think, that always, although my parents were never overt with this kind of...
It's funny because people think Wesley Huff's just an idiot and doesn't know what he's talking about, but he's like, that's not a spring chicken. He's read all the different religious works, and it's like it shows you, like, wow, this is where the deception lies and where the truth is mixed with lies compared to the Bible. So it's pretty cool.
Stuff. They always had the perspective that, we're Christians. We believe that this worldly perspective is true, but hey, this stuff isn't scary. This stuff isn't, off limits. We can investigate these things. And they never said that outright, but that I always felt this kind of attitude of that kind of perspective. And, having been exposed in majority Muslim contexts and seeing that kind of stuff, and my mom having a pretty good knowledge growing up in India of things like Hinduism and Sikhism and that. I don't know how much of the kind of testimony stuff you watched of mine, but just before my 12th birthday, I actually was diagnosed with a neurological condition that left me paralyzed from the waist down.
Yeah, I did see all that.
Yeah. So that's a condition that's called acute transverse myelitis, which I often say is a word you can forget as soon as you hear it, because it's a complicated one. But what happened was that I had the flu, and my body's immune system attacked the nerve endings at the base of my spinal cord and caused swelling and cut off the communication between my brain and my legs. And
instantaneously, right?
Yeah, basically. I'd gone down for a nap. I was camping out in the bathroom floor for flu reasons. And when I woke up, about 30 minutes later, I couldn't feel my legs. And so, yeah, that's the acute part of the acute transverse myelitis, was that it was basically instantaneous. And that's what made the diagnosis as severe as it was. Like, they said there's a 30% chance. It was like a small percentage of probability that I would recover, but a much higher percentage that there would be a lot of either complete paralysis for the rest of my life, or some kind of issues with walking. It's related to diseases like multiple sclerosis, in that it's neurological and it affects that kind of thing. And 1 month from the day that I woke up and couldn't feel my legs, I woke up on a Saturday morning, got out of bed, walked over to my wheelchair and sat down.
1 month?
1 month, yeah. January 8th to February 8th, exactly.
Very fortunate.
You're telling me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What treatment did they give you?
So initially they gave me steroids to reduce the swelling, but so I spent 11 days in the hospital, being overseen by pediatric neurologists and specialists in this, because it's a very rare condition. And so they were studying me, and they gave me steroids, and they did some other tests, but really there was no true kind of treatment in that. So I was doing physiotherapy. I would be pulled out of gym class in school, but it was a little bit of a joke. Like, can you move your legs? Can you? It was.
Could you move anything?
No, nothing.
Could you feel anything?
No. In fact, when I was in the hospital, I'd wake up and there'd be pinpricks in my legs, because they'd be testing where the reactions were. and they'd have used a syringe. And so I'd wake up and there'd be these tiny little pinpricks in my legs because they'd been testing while I was asleep to see what the kind of, whether it was registering neurologically with anything. But I couldn't feel anything. I was fully a paraplegic.
Whoa.
Yeah, but going back to that, like, so I experienced this, what I consider to be a true supernatural experience, in that I walked into the hospital to the doctors that had overseen me, and they were the first ones that used the word miracle. They said, we really don't have any type of medical explanation, and mainly because there was no atrophy. Because of the cutoff of the communication, my muscles in those 30 days were fine. And just
Wow, guys, just want to comment really quick. It's amazing. Like stuff like this happens all the time. I hear stories. Even non-Christians know stories like this. People just get healed miraculously, and they could say, "Ah, it's just just as things happen. Doesn't mean there's a God." But in reality, there's just something beyond the physical. People say, like Billy Carson, others, well, it's your mind. You got to have a positive mind. You can defeat anything if you have a positive mindset. You do spiritual things. And some of that stuff might have some truth in it, but in reality, it's because there's a creator who oversees everything, spiritual, physical, emotional, and he gives common grace to people. So even if people are not necessarily Christians, they can still experience God's healing. I've heard of people who God was pursuing and saving them from car accident after car accident, gunshot after gunshot, until they finally like said, Jesus, you're real, save me. So this is like the story of how God reached down to Wes Huff when he was young. It's just amazing. I just want to mention something. I really respect Wes too because we have a similar background. Not in the, I'm not a PhD level scholar, but I was a competitive track and field athlete. I was actually a decathlete in college, like Wes. So I did all the sprints, the high jump, long jump, triple jump, 1500 meters, 100 meter, all that stuff. So a javelin throw, shot put, discus. So I did all of those events as a decathlete. And I was, wanted to use it for God's glory. I went to a Christian school, and it was pretty cool. I didn't experience the health issues that he did when he was young, but I definitely felt like God gave me, the ability to compete. I wasn't the best either. Competed against somebody who went to the Olympics, so I ran against him, and he went to the Olympics for the country of Grenada. His name's Victor. Forgot his last name, but Lyndon Victor. You can look him up. He went to the 2016 Olympics. I competed in 2014, 2015 against them. So it's kind of pretty cool, like to hear the story of Wes did the same thing, like track and field, like I did, and now we're both like Christian missionaries and apologists. Pretty cool. So that was pretty interesting. I was actually surprised. I've listened to Rogan just a few. I mean, I've listened to his podcast before when he had Christian people on or semi-Christians, and never heard him mention about Joe Rogan's. I mean, Joe never had mentioned about Joseph Smith, and that's the first time I've ever heard Rogan, who's totally non-Christian, totally secular guy who understands the total ridiculous claims of Mormonism. I mean, I talk to Mormons all the time for years and years. I've researched Mormonism. There is no archaeological findings about the stuff that the Book of Mormon claims. Plus, the Book of Mormon just makes so many claims about Jews being here 500 BC in America after the Babylonian captivity. No archaeological findings ever been found of that. And of course, atheists will say we don't have Bible findings. Well, we do actually. There's steles. Mermet Bastille talks about King David existed. He was conquered by Assyrian king. So Nebuchadnezzar and stuff. So the thing is that there is no archaeological findings for Book of Mormon, and I'm amazed how God's showed that to just Joe Rogan, because most people don't really know that about Mormonism. Mormons are nice people, and he even goes to say that, but he just knows that there's just so much deception with it, which is pretty great that he knows that about Mormonism.
like,
Well, he covers.
All right, this is amazing. If you guys just check this out, what Joe Rogan said, he said he watched 20 hours of Wesley Huff stuff. I have not. I mean, I could be wrong because I don't watch Rogan episodes all the time, but or a lot. But I mean, to watch 20 hours of stuff, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, that's something like he could probably do like the Ancient Aliens guys. Maybe he watched that, or maybe like listening to Donald Trump like 20 hours. I'm sure he has. So it kind of shows you the amount of respect Rogan has for Wes. and it really should blow all the claims of the atheists out of the water. I mean, I've heard all the different ways of how Christianity is false, but you can't dispute that Rogan really has a respect for Wesley Huff, because this guy's a guy who's getting his PhD in this stuff, and he even knows more stuff than most of the people who would be debating against him, against Christianity, and using the stuff that would say, oh, Christianity is destroyed because of this document not there, or the ending of Mark, 11 through 20 not being there in the oldest manuscripts. It doesn't dispute the fact that the earliest church fathers knew Mark and Matthew, John were together, the Gospels, and they knew the resurrection. Even in Mark, it has the angels telling the woman is the resurrection. So it's like, just because a lot of people say come out saying just try to destroy Christianity, it doesn't dispute the fact that this guy's done his research and Joe Rogan respects that, and then there is evidence for Christianity.
Couple weeks, and you've spent a lot of time on this. This is not a casual, cursory examination of these texts and of religion. This is a long journey. And that's what's particularly exceptional and really interesting to me, because I'm always fascinated by people that have really gone down the road, like really gone down the road, because you don't meet a whole lot of them. I know a lot of Christians that can quote you some versions of the New Testament, some Psalms, but the go all the way to the back, way, and that's what you've done. That's very interesting. So this is like, how old are you?
I'm 33.
Which is very young for someone who has
chicken.
the depth of knowledge that you have.
Again, sorry for the interruption. I have to do it. Copyright claims. And also because of commentary. The thing is, I'm almost 33. My birthday's next month. And I'm like, dude, this guy is so incredibly smart. I mean, he knows Sumerian and other languages that I've never even had the privilege of studying. I know Russian fluently because I'm from Ukraine. I know English very well. A little bit Ukrainian, I know. I spoke mostly Russian, and because I'm from the city of Odessa, it's mostly Russian. This is why the war is also happening too, which is a stupid war, a whole nother discussion. But thing is that like I know a little bit of Spanish too, but it's like this guy, I mean, he knows so much in the history and all this stuff, and it's like it's just amazing at 33 years old.
So you've been doing this essentially from that miraculous moment. That ignited this spark, even though you came from a missionary background, and then from then on. So for the past 11 years. 12 years or 20 years, 30 years. Like, it's your whole life, essentially. It's all been this.
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, I went to university with full intention of going into the police force. I did my undergraduate studies, and then I kind of mapped out this plan that I was going to become a police detective. And that was my goal. And I think I realized...
Why that? Because you like getting to the bottom of things?
It could be.
Because you do.
That's funny because I actually wanted to be in the police force too, because I got my degree in the computer science. So I was a system engineer for a while, and then I was like, I hate this. I wasn't made for this. And I became a missionary to Ukraine in the Ukraine war zone, and I was like, I want to go back to the Ukraine war zone. And I was like, God's not God's will for me to do that, because I probably would have died there. And this is during COVID. And then I was like, well, I want to be in the police force. Or the special forces, as a Army Green Beret, and then God said, no, you're not doing that. And then I felt like, okay, and I became a missionary in Arizona. So it's just amazing how God just changes your path when you submit to Him.
Right? Yeah, well, if someone spends 21 years like getting to the bottom of a religion, you'd probably be pretty good at cracking cases.
I hope so. I think that might have been part of it. I also... There was an aspect of when I was in high school where they were like, you got to figure out what you're doing, or you're going to be homeless and you're going to die.
Yeah, I remember that part.
I felt that like
it was a terrifying moment in life.
Man, I always tell people when they're in high school, like, you can chill out. Like, it's going to be okay.
I don't think so.
You don't think so? I wonder if it's different now, because
I think you should have a certain amount of desperation. Because I think that it ignites the fire within you to do something.
There's probably something to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The people that I know that have been too pampered and taken care of and didn't have a fear of everything going completely sideways, they never really get the momentum that's necessary to accomplish things in life.
Yeah, there's probably something to that. I mean, desperation.
A little desperation fear, I think, is good for you.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be comfortable. I don't think that's necessarily a good path. I mean, I think you should have perspective and you should enjoy your life as a young person and have those moments. But you should also realize you got work to do.
Well, and stress is good, right? Stress creates perseverance and creates patterns that allow you to succeed.
Yes.
I mean, this is like athletics 101, right?
I think that's very important.
You got to push yourself. And I think actually part of that also led in, like, I'm a big believer in athletic discipline needs to go hand in hand. I mean, I know you are too. It needs to go hand in hand with any other type of, like, whether it's an intellectual endeavor or like, because it trains you to be able to go into places that are uncomfortable.
Yes.
And that uncomfortability allows you to then become stronger, you know, realize where your inadequacies are. And especially when you're with people who are better than you. I mean, when I was running at York University, there were two guys on our team who, because I was okay individually, but I ran for the relay team. Yes, I was a sprinter. And one of the guys was part of the, they medaled, when Canada medaled at Worlds, he was part of that relay team. And then my other training partner, Busy, who, he ended up competing in Tokyo for Canada. And when you're beside someone who is like just a genetic freak, you're like, oh, okay. Like, that's different.
Yeah.
Right? And it both pushes you, but it also reveals your limitations, where that doesn't inhibit you. Like, that shouldn't discourage you to go up to that line of being able to push yourself. But at the exact same time, it creates a realism that, like, I can train as much as I want to. I'm not going to run like that. Right.
What's funny is that that's exactly how I felt like when I was a decathlete and running in my college. I competed against, like I said, an Olympian that went to the Olympics a year and a half after I competed with him. And I was like, this guy won the whole decathlon. And because it goes by 1,000 points per event, so you have to get up to 10,000 points. And I was like, I was okay, but I wasn't nowhere near his score in most of the events. And so I beat him in some events, but it was like, man, he was a genetic freak from the country of Grenada or Grenada, whatever. But I was like, man, this like forced me to get better. It's like I want to get better, but it's like, but I knew that it's like I didn't have his gift of athleticism, and it's like, yeah, you want to get better when you see people like that. It's like it shouldn't make you give up.
Right.
Yeah.
And so. Yeah, but going back to what you were asking, like, I think there was part of that in wanting to go into the police force, but then realizing, like, around my third year of university, that my passions and motivations were very, very different, and that I didn't know how to go about that or where the proper place to do that was, but I knew that I needed to lean into that to some degree, particularly with the Bible, because I was claiming that this Bible talks about this guy Jesus, and I'm a Christian. So I have a friend, Andy Bannister. He's out in the UK, and he says if you take Christ out of Christian, all you're left with is Ian. And Ian's a great guy, but he's not going to save you from your sins. And so, like, if I'm wrong about the Bible, those people who push back on me, right, those skeptics of various worldviews, if the things they were saying about the Bible were true, then it did actually legitimately undermine what I believed. And so I needed to take that seriously. I had an obligation to actually investigate those things as far as I could.
Playoffs. We're talking about playoffs? You bet we are. Get in on the action with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner. 21. How old are they?
They're anywhere between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century BC. So it's kind of tricky because the Dead Sea Scrolls they're like a library that we refer to. So it's approximately 970 documents, but it's distributed out between 10,000 and 11,000 fragments. So there's a lot going on there, right? So, and some of these, I mean, are so fragmentary that you look at them and it's like confetti. Because they're, I mean, 3,000 years old, but not quite that. They're like 2,000 plus years old. Right?
Animal skins too, right?
Yeah, well, all sorts of things: animal skins, papyri, and then some of them are actually done on copper.
Really?
They're like inscribed in copper.
Oh wow!
Yeah, one of the coolest ones. Actually, this relates because I know you're a Marco Allegro guy. The first time I was introduced to Marco Allegro was not his Sacred Mushroom and the Cross stuff, but he published a book on what's called the Copper Scroll, because part of the Dead Sea Scroll fragments is this inscribed document on copper, which is an ancient treasure map.
Can you see it? Is it
Yeah.
online?
Yeah, Jamie, pull up hey.
There it is. Wow.
Yeah. So it's in Hebrew, and it is wild. So it has these sites where it says buried treasure is found.
Whoa.
And there have been a number of guys who have tried to like look for it. And so
Does it say what the treasure is?
you know what? Off the top of my head, I don't know. But
Look how crazy that language is.
I know, right? And so, but the Dead Sea Scrolls, so it's like stuff like this. It's papyri, it's animal skins, and it's a number of different languages. So the vast majority of it is in Hebrew, but there's also a lot in Aramaic and then Greek and in Nabatean. So it's like an umbrella term to just describe a whole bunch of literature. So a lot of it is biblical because it was written by this group out in the desert called the Essenes who lived at Qumran. So, but then other stuff of it is just, it's just Jewish literature of various stripes that were hidden in caves all around the Dead Sea.
So a lot of atheists, maybe you might one of them, say that, well, the Dead Sea Scrolls doesn't mean that it was proved the Bible, because there was a lot of other documents found, like the Gnostic Gospels, Enoch, the Apocrypha, but it doesn't mean that the whole Old Testament in the Septuagint wasn't found. It was, and so that proves that the Masoretic text, which was used for King James translation, was almost like 99% accurate to the Septuagint text that was found in Dead Sea Scrolls. So there was fragments of the Old Testament, there's a full book of Isaiah. So it actually does prove that the Bible is transmitted accurately. And of course, you have some scribal errors, as WES HUFF talks about, but it doesn't change the main message of the Bible or the Gospels.
So the scrolls, as it were, aren't all biblical. Some of them is just a counting of the times.
Yeah. Oh, Jamie looked it up. 65 tons of gold and 26 tons of silver.
65.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. What can you make out of that?
You can see why someone would try to track that down.
Boy.
Yeah.
Wow.
And when we're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, like you have ones like the Great Isaiah Scroll, which is fully complete. Like it's a copy of the book of Isaiah, and it's a full complete scroll. But then other ones are so fragmentary that we think they're written in Hebrew, but we can't actually tell.
Oh wow!
Because no one's willing to like piece these. And this is true for a lot of stuff. So the largest grouping of papyri literature in the world is the Oxyrhynchus collection, which we get a good portion of our oldest manuscripts of the New Testament from. But if you go to Oxford and you look at the Oxyrhynchus collection, and you pull out that drawer, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and you're like,
right?
Like most of it is untranslated, untranscribed, because the amount of man hours that it would just take to even put it together, never mind then go to the effort of transcribing and translating it. And most people are not willing to do that.
And if you're missing chunks, how do you even make that puzzle connect?
Well, that's part of my area of speciality and research is in regards to that. So I study paratextual features. We're really going to get nerdy today.
Let's get nerdy.
So you look at the features of the manuscripts, not necessarily the words, but things like the spaces between the words, the development of punctuation, indentation or outdentation, and I look at the margins, and I try to, based on the average size of manuscripts in and around that time, and also the average spacing of words and the margins on the top, bottom, and the side, recreate what the manuscript could have possibly looked like.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So when you say the book of Isaiah is intact, how similar is it to the book of Isaiah that's in the Bible?
So that one is fascinating. So this isn't true for all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but when we discovered the Great Isaiah Scroll, previous to that, the earliest copy of Isaiah that we had was in the Masoretic text, which is in the Middle Ages.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it was literally.
And that's what I just mentioned. The Masoretic text was what we used. And I was like, found, yeah, Middle Ages, 900 AD, 1000 AD.
Literally 1,000 years. We literally pushed back our understanding of Isaiah 1,000 years. And the thing that really shocked scholars, like I said, this isn't true for all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but one of the things that shocked them about Isaiah was that it was word for word identical to the Masoretic text.
Word for word.
Word for word.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that
So
it
this is
right
the Great
there?
Isaiah Scroll. So if you go to Israel and
Wait,
you go...
is that papyrus?
Yes. No, I think that one is vellum.
What is vellum?
So I should be more specific. So parchment is animal skin. Vellum can be used synonymously with the term parchment. Technically, parchment is like baby animal skin, like calves or lambs. But this is the Great Isaiah Scroll, and you can see like they stitch together the parchment because it's so long.
God, it's so beautiful. The way they wrote back then was so beautiful. I mean, maybe it's because I can't read it that it's so fat. Maybe if I saw English, I would think that's beautiful too.
Yeah.
Especially script, like if cursive. Cursive is very beautiful. But that is so fascinating because obviously coming from a point of ignorance, the letters look so similar. Like so many of this is the what I always got about cuneiform. When I look at that, I'm like, it's just one particular sort of character that's this way and that way and up and down and
Cuneiform is wild.
Weird.
It's really, really tricky. And that's the thing when, like, if you're studying ancient languages and you start to study Greek, like the Greek alphabet is similar enough that you're like, okay, alpha looks like an A, right? Delta looks like a D. So you can figure it out. And so it tricks you because you start off and you're like, oh, this is phobios, fear. I know what a phobia is. And you get this false sense of encouragement. And then, the further you go down the rabbit hole, you're like, oh, I'm screwed. So, but Hebrew is completely the opposite because the writing system is so different. The learning curve is hard at the beginning. And then you're like, everything is just 3 letters with a suffix added to it. And so it feels like, whereas the opposite is true with Greek. Greek, you're like, I get this. And then when you really go down the rabbit hole, you're like, oh crap, none of the things that I learned about that are supposed to be standard, all of them have exceptions.
Wow.
But cuneiform's a wild one.
Do you know who Rick Strassman is?
No.
He's a scholar, and he did a lot of early work, FDA-approved work on psychedelics. And he spent 16 years teaching himself to read ancient Hebrew.
Nice.
Yeah, so because he wanted to really understand the Bible from the original source of ancient Hebrew and to understand it in context. Because ancient Hebrew, the way the words are structured, is so different than English, and that something must be lost in translation. So he spent 16 years teaching himself how to read ancient Hebrew. I was like, that is that is such dedication. 16 years.
It's a long time. That seems...
Well, you're self-taught. I mean, he's doing it himself.
Yeah. Self-teaching. Yeah. I self-taught myself Greek at first, and then when I started learning it formally, I realized how much you miss when you self-teach yourself.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, how many people can teach you ancient Hebrew? How many courses are available?
Oh, you can take it at any graduate college.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And is it, it's not something that we know what it sounded like, correct?
Yeah, I mean, this is the big debate with ancient languages.
Right.
Like, same thing with... Yeah, arguably, we don't know how any of this was pronounced.
Right.
I mean, modern Greek speakers get really mad at me when I say that because they're like, of course we know how it's pronounced. It's pronounced like we pronounce it, right? And on all my videos where I'm like site translating Greek manuscripts, there's so many comments of modern Greek speakers getting mad at how I'm pronouncing things. But realistically, yeah, we don't really know how most of the things are pronounced. With anything.
But isn't that very bizarre when you're translating? Like if you go back to, like, say, the Epic of Gilgamesh, we don't even know what the words sounded like.
Yeah.
We kind of know what they represent, and then we do a literal translation of what they represent. But if you've never heard, no one can speak ancient Sumerian.
Yeah. Well, Sumerian's a wild one because it's a language isolate.
What does that mean?
So Hebrew is an Afro-Semitic language. So Hebrew is related to all of these other languages like Aramaic and Akkadian, but language isolates have no adjacent comparisons.
Whoa.
So, because I tried to teach myself Sumerian and I failed and I just gave up because I couldn't do it because I had nothing to really compare it to.
Right.
So Sumeriologists are very like, they're a field of their own because I learned a little bit of Akkadian because I had studied Semitic languages, and there's enough crossover between things like Hebrew and Aramaic and Akkadian, but Sumerian, you have nothing to compare it to.
Okay, guys, so I found that pretty fascinating. Hearing that Sumerian has nothing compared to, I've read that before, that it was a language isolate, and there's many languages like that too, like the ancient languages that we just don't have a comparison to because it's just literally there's an isolate. There's no other language where it kind of you can compare it to where it came from, and it's kind of amazing because people say, oh, it's myth. There was no such thing as a Tower of Babel. And I was reading Genesis, and it's like God's, split the languages. And well, let's say the atheists don't know, they don't believe there's a God. Well, how did all of these languages come about? And then some of the languages are so isolated, like they just popped out of nowhere, kind of like Cambrian explosion in evolutionary theory. Excuse me, where you had all these more complex, advanced life forms pop out millions of years ago, and it's just they popped out of nowhere somehow from less complex to incredibly complex without a intermediary forms. That's called the Cambrian explosion. So it's kind of like that. It's a language explosion. Like, where did it come from? And now again, doesn't mean it proves Babel, but if the Bible does say that there's some that the languages were split up and just kind of out of nowhere, it does give credence to the idea that maybe this language really did come from 4,000, 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago after the flood, where all these new languages popped into existence. It's kind of amazing. Yeah, it's another thing that people give like arguments. Okay, like there's so many like 40, 100,000 mistakes in manuscripts, and it's like, no, there's scribal errors, or maybe they copied it hastily because, again, like Wes says, they weren't as concerned with total and utter dotting the I's and the T's like the Hebrew scriptures, which another reason you can trust the Old Testament, because of the copies and copies and copies. They're always trying to be as accurate. If they made a wrong jot or tittle, they would throw away that papyrus or whatever and then scroll start it again. So in New Testament, even though there's like 400,000 differences between manuscripts, it does not make the message unclear. It's like if you text, I'll be home after 3 p.m., but you say LLI or BEHME at 3 or something. Yeah, there's mistakes in that message, but you can still understand the message is I'll be home after 3 p.m. So that's what a lot of these stuff are. Now, of course, you have the atheist scholars, Ammon Hillman, and other people say, no, 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 but there's missing text and there's other texts. But that stuff, again, is it's so little that it doesn't change the message. Again, transmission, the context. There's stuff that biblical scholars argue still, but it does not mean that it changes the whole message. Again, this is what Wesley is saying, that it doesn't actually destroy Christianity because there is some mistakes within the copies. Like, it doesn't mean the message itself was destroyed if you read the New Testament. And even if you read the church fathers, you can reproduce the whole New Testament. That's right. A lot of people say that, well, the ancients were dumb, stupid, they're not as enlightened as us. And I've thought, a lot of times, like, these people like, oh yeah, we're smarter, and it's like, it's not very true, because I mean, look at the stuff that was built back then to last for thousands of years, or today we build things to last for decades, maybe 100 years. But it's like, people were smart back then, and they had to memorize things, and the main stories, they had to carry that for decades. That's why, just because Paul the Apostle wrote the letters, a few years after Jesus was supposedly resurrected, if you don't believe in his resurrection, and he accurately could say what Peter told him when they met. He could accurately say what the Gospel of Luke said, because Gospel of Luke was being written during time of Paul, because the evidence shows that Paul was quoting the Lord's Supper word for word from what Luke's Gospel was, giving you some internal evidence of when Luke was being written. So Just because these Jewish people and scholars, they had to memorize a lot more than the modern information age of today, and so that's why the main point of the story can be true, even if it's 5, 10 years, 20 years down the road. It doesn't mean that it's not true. That's why you have to compare and look at the evidence.
And when
That is incredible. Most people don't even know that. And something most people don't know that is only like 1 to 2% of ancient biblical history has been discovered too. And I didn't even know that until recently. There's this expedition scholar, a guy, Expedition Bible YouTube channel. Forgot his name, but he actually has been on all the archaeological sites of the Bible, and he says like people keep thinking that the Bible is false, but even the secular scholars and biblical, they don't argue necessarily. They argue more against like, okay, well, what does this mean? Like Jericho walls. Like this woman said it was this in the 60s, but then currently they're discovering that the walls fell in, like the Bible says. So the question is like, like how much evidence is there really for biblical history? It's only like 1 to 2%, and it makes sense because it's like a lot of the stuff we found. There's enough circumstantial evidence and direct evidence, just enough to believe, but enough for anybody who really does not want to believe will be like, I don't want to believe this is. So it's like, because I've seen that. I know the devil can play these things on anybody, but it's like if there's more evidence for Christianity than Beowulf or Tiberius. Existence of Tiberius is written 80 years, 100 years later after his existence. It's like there's more evidence for Jesus too.
crazy.
And that's what he tried to tell Billy Carson, because Billy Carson was saying it's exactly similar to the Bible. And yes, there again, all these atheists, they keep saying, oh, there's some similarities. Yes, there's some similarities because they borrow from the same ancient, historical pasts. But it's like, but the Bible itself, people say it was written as a polemic against the ancient beliefs like the Numa and Akkadian Sumerian beliefs, yeah, there's part of it where Genesis, God was kind of showing Moses, if you believe in the Creator, God is showing them the true story, and so, but it was a polemic against the idea that these gods came out of the ground and matter was eternal. It's like, no, there was a beginning. God created the heavens and the earth. It was different than the gods of the Numa Elish.
And that there's this narrative battle that takes place where some gods fight against other gods, and the world around us that we see and like human beings are the end result of this battle. And so they would read this on every Babylonian New Year. And one of the main themes was basically that, like, it's all chance. It's all a random mistake. You were created without purpose and intention because Tiamat gets destroyed. And she is the god that, you come from. And then you read Genesis chapter 1, and it says, in the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth, and he makes it good. And there's this idea that, like, that's countercultural in the idea that the Babylonians did not think that the world was good. And that, like, at the end of every refrain, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good, and then it's very good at the end. And that humanity in particular is created in the image of God. Like, that's a very, not just like kings, which a lot of ancient Near Eastern cultures believed that kings were created in the image of God, but that humanity in general is created in the image of God. And this idea of the Imago Dei.
That's where you get human rights. It really does come from the Old Testament and the New Testament, that we were created in the image of God. These Enuma Elish, the things that Billy Carson says, the elites were the ones who were divine. They were the god kings. The regular people were just created to be slaves. I mean, it's very obvious. Even the atheists, if you don't believe in Christianity, you can see that in ancient culture, it was very, very difficult to survive. If you did not have power, you were not considered equal. And it's what Christianity really developed, because Jesus, I mean, the ways Jesus treated women, the way Jesus treated other people and people who were lower than Jesus. Let's say he's not God, he's just a human being, but he treated people lower in the Jewish system with great respect. That's what makes Christianity so different than other religions. That's amazing. The words didn't match, you fill in the gaps. Yeah, there's a lot of forgeries too. I mean, a lot of people who are biblical scholars say that, oh yeah, you can't trust all these Dead Sea Scrolls forgeries. Sure, there is. Like, this guy Kip Davis says that too, and he doesn't trust the Bible anymore. He's not a Christian. But again, that doesn't destroy the obvious manuscripts that are accurate and that prove that, the Dead Sea Scrolls and biblically were accurate.
In these holes, they're called lacunas. Um, the words, a lot of the words don't fit this line. Good one. Like nobody, no, you're not.
Yeah, the resurrection doesn't become totally impossible if you posit the idea that, man, this universe was a miraculous explosion of existence. Like, how did this happen? There had to be some sort of intelligent designer, big banger, who banged this into existence. How is this even possible? That's the biggest miracle, actually. So, if it is, then what if there's something beyond the atom that created that atom? And so if that beyond of the atom created the atom, can it manipulate those atoms, which is what being alive or dead is you're manipulating atoms, and whatever animates those atoms, you could move it back and forth like quantum mechanics. It's like it's there, it's not there. So can you be alive and dead at the same time? Can you be dead and then come alive? Or can you be dead and alive in another place? That's exactly what quantum mechanics answers.
And you
Yeah, if you really look at Luke, I mean, especially maybe other gospels are not as maybe using the historiography of Luke, because he was more of a doctor, so he wanted to make things orderly. But he does say, like, this is exactly what Wes is saying. It's like these people expected certain events to be written within closest to the date. So when people say, well, the gospels were not written closest to the date, there were 30 to 40 years later, I mean, even that is not a big deal at all during ancient writings. Things were considered to be 30 was like actually really early, and you could actually say it's accurate. But when Luke wrote it, it's like he had to go back to the people that were there, which is why you had the birth account, the Jesus being 13 years old, and being lost, like all these things, small details, even in Acts, it's like someone had to be there, and he uses really incredible historiological methods that were like precise at that time.
that communicate.
And it's funny because I mean, Joe Rogan knows there's snarky debate atheists, and I meet those a lot too.
Um, they vary just like Christians vary. First versions of them are essentially believers. They worship the concept of there being no God. This is it. When you die, nothing happens.
Yeah.
And that to me is always so arrogant, bizarre, and so spectacular. The idea that you know for sure that when the lights shut out, that's a variable. Okay. Absence of evidence is not that's as bizarre as death. Radically similar.
Yeah.
Those are really weird. They're really weird.
Yeah, near-death experiences really are, I mean, most, not a lot, because there's ones that are not accurate or fake or made up, but a lot of them are very similar. Like you have a portal to heaven, one, and then you just fall straight down into hell. It's kind of amazing how similar they are, a lot of these near-death experiences.
How many similarities people have in these near-death experiences from accidents and all sorts of things that people... I just think it's things. How could you know what you don't know?
Yeah.
You cannot know what you don't know. And the problem is that there's a cachet, that there's a social credit amongst academics in particular that's ascribed to a person who is atheist, a person who he's brilliant, he's not silly, he doesn't believe in myths, he doesn't. I get it. I get why there's social pressure in that regard. I get it. But to not look at the universe itself, just this creation engine, stellar nurseries, just the bizarre, a very narrow perception of what this whole thing is all about.
Yeah. Deny the virgin birth of the universe.
Yeah. Well, all of it. Just the big. There's so many more impressive miracles than any of the things that people think of in the Bible. It's just they're so weird in our day and age that we're not willing to like. Very clean and easy to measure, and they
He's right. Yeah, it's like we don't want to consider like the epicness of life. Why does life exist? It's just too clean, too easy. Like there's no such thing as spiritualism, no materialism. That's it. It's like, whoa, there's so many people with experiences with spirituality, occult, the Ouija boards, the even CIA. Ouija boards and the CIA releasing Project Stargate recently admitting that we might live in some sort of simulation. I mean, this is a CIA. They're full of liars and deceivers, but they've done projects that were, supernatural and they try to access supernatural. So, of course, the CIA discovered, oh, yeah, there's some supernatural things going on that we can't even explain, obviously.
Often or not. And, I think most of what it means to be a human being in a meaningful way is not measurable. Most of it. Love and friendship and community, these things are not very measurable. They're very strange. The bond that people have with their family and their loved ones, and it's very strange. That love connection.
Yeah, that's not physical. It's the love bond. I mean, all that stuff, relationships, it's invisible. It's not materialism.
Whatever love is, whatever good is, it's a very real thing, and it seems to not exist, certainly not in the volume in other animals that exists in us. There's obviously nurturing in other animals, they nurture their loved ones, but their perception of life and death and all of it is very different than ours. So it leads me to why is our version of life so much more rich and complicated than any other being that exists, and why do we have this insatiable desire to learn and know more? What is it?
Why does this, however many 3 pounds of gray matter in my brain, why is that able to plummet the intricacies of the universe? Right. Like, and I think that's ultimately the questions that we should be asking in terms of, you matter more than you are matter. There's something going on.
There's something going on with all of us. We kind of know it and we don't know it, but it's just, you can't measure it, and so people don't like that. They don't like that. It makes them feel dumb. What happens when you die? Like, even that conversation. How the fuck do you?
Jesus, like in terms of your own like journeying and trying to find answers to ultimate questions. What do you think of the historical person of Jesus?
Ooh, this is very important. This is where the rubber meets the road for Joe Rogan.
Well, it certainly seems like there's a lot of people that believe that there was this very exceptional human being that existed. So the question is, what does that mean? Does it mean he was the Son of God? Does it mean he was just some completely unique human being that had this vision of humanity and this way of educating people and spreading this ideology that would ultimately change the way human beings interact with each other forever? So what is he the Son of God? That's another question, right? Or do we all have that inside of us? Do we all have that ability to change everything around us inside of us? Do we all have that unique connection to the divine? And is he a representation of the best version of that? Or was he an actual person that was the Son of God? And is it important? I don't know. I mean, what does it mean? It's just the fact that it's a question to ponder is a miracle in itself, in a way.
Years ago, he wouldn't even ponder that. So this is a huge step up that Joe Rogan's even pondering. Who is Jesus? Who do you say he is? That's what Jesus said to the apostles. Who do you say I am? That is the most important question in human existence. And this is where God is finally tugging at his heart.
Just the fact that there's this concept of this person that died for our sins as the Son of God, but you have to you have to believe in a bunch of stuff. Concept of that is interesting to people, because what it can do to people is offer them a very unique way to change the way they feel about the world itself. And if you do follow that, I know a lot of Christians are hardcore Christians. They're some of the nicest people you'll ever meet in your life. So it does work. Right? Like, if you do live like a Christian and you do follow the principles of Christ, you will have a richer, more love-filled life. So it is true, right? But you have to submit to this concept that this guy was the child of God who came down to earth, let himself be crucified, came back from the dead, explained a bunch of stuff for people, and then said, all right, see you when I come back.
You don't know how you can wrap your head around that particular claim.
And if he came back, here's the thing. If he came back, who the fuck would believe him today? CGI. Most bizarre thing of all time. If artificial reality is indiscernible from regular reality, and Jesus chooses to, right, when it's impossible to discern. If we really reach a point where virtual reality is indistinct.
Wow, I don't know if God's giving me some discernment, but Rogan is right. I've thought about it too because it's like we're reaching a point of human existence where we do have all the TV, we do have all technology, AI, where people ask like, well, why wasn't there a photo 2000 years ago to prove Jesus was God and did these miracles? Well, would we still even believe 2000 years ago that Jesus did these miracles? I don't think so because that's why God always leaves it up. You have all the evidence, but you have to cross that barrier from the evidence into faith because all the evidence can be pro or con depending on your heart. I mean, it can apply to other things in life too. Even concepts like quantum mechanics used to be like, whatever, but the more we're interacting with it, can't really like prove it, but we can see that this is how atoms can interact with each other or be in two places at once. Completely, doesn't make sense, but based on circumstantial evidence around the scientific idea of the atom, we can see that. So it's like the same thing with God. Even in mathematics, there's axioms where you have to accept. There's something called Gödel's theorem, and it's basically you have to accept certain presuppositions in math, and if you try to disprove them, you can't. Basically, I'm not describing it perfectly. I did a video on it, but Gödel's theorem is like, if you try to prove for something fundamental, you can't. You have to accept certain fundamental principles by faith and then go off of that to do math. So it's the same thing with Jesus Christ. Who do you say he is? Unlike any other mythological figure, this guy exists in time and space. So who do we say that he is based on all the circumstantial evidence? What is the foundation of truth? And Joe Rogan's finally feeling that.
Distinguishable from regular reality, which
Right.
we're probably 100 years away from that or something. Like maybe not even that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's probably why Jesus came in the first century and not the 21st century.
But imagine if that's the big catch. Like Jesus does return, but when he returns, we're just so that we can't even tell.
Yeah.
Or maybe
I don't know anything about that. Yeah. I really appreciate you're friends with, right? Like the Jordan Petersons and the Douglas Murrays of the world, or, the Tom Hollands, not the Spider-Man actor, the historian, who talk about this stuff. I think I really like the way that Jordan Peterson articulates it, but I think he misses the forest for the trees.
How so?
In that he sees
This is a good. I've made videos about this where Jordan Peterson misses the forest from the trees about who Jesus is, and Wes talks about it.
Jesus as
Jesus
an
as an
archetype.
archetype. And I don't
Gives you the opportunity to see him as the archetype. Because I have this love-hate relationship with all of Peterson's stuff because he seems to get so much right where he walks up to the line, but he doesn't want to cross over.
And is the crossover, you think, connected
It's exactly what I've said in my videos.
to a life in academia? Or
No.
What do you think it is?
I wonder, and I'd love to talk to him about this, like how do you remedy this issue that, because he seems to think that the concept of Jesus as an example is more important than the actual flesh and blood first century itinerant Jewish preacher who was crucified and rose from the dead physically, which is the claim of the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament. That's an example for us to look on and live by. But I actually think that Jesus condemns moralism. And ultimately what I see Peterson doing is looking at Jesus as a moral example. And if Jesus is nothing but a moral example, then you can save yourself and you don't actually need a savior. And so
Yes, and that's the fundamental part. That's where even the devil can even lead people to that. It's okay, I accept these truths, but fundamentally, it's just like moral example, and then you're going to lead to, you got to save yourself. You got to make your bed. You got to be like a lobster. You got to work harder. I mean, this is literally where Peterson stops at.
So I think actually Jesus would have critiqued that because Jesus was very against moralism.
And how does he?
Yes, Jesus was against moralism.
How do you define Jesus being against moralism? Like, what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, Jesus looks at the religiosity of his day with like particular groups like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who are these other groups of Jews during his day. So we talked about the Essenes, who actually aren't mentioned in the Bible, but there are other groups like the Pharisees, who are like lay scholars, and the Sadducees, who are professional priest scholars. And he's constantly critiquing the fact that they have this hypocritical religiosity to them, where they're doing things like tithing their mint leaves, like to make sure that they get all of, this is where we get the idea of the letter of the law versus the intention of the law. Like Jesus critiques them for that because he says, you're trying to do everything right and you're missing the point. So one of the things he says is like, if your donkey falls in a ravine on the Sabbath, do you pull it out or is that work? Like, what's the point of the Sabbath? Is it to not do any work? Like, is it to make sure that you're not working too hard because you might be breaking the Sabbath? Or like, what is the point? He says, like, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And that there's this intention. This is the whole Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, is he keeps saying, you have heard it said, but I say, and he refers to the Mosaic law. And it looks like he's critiquing the Mosaic law, but he's not actually. He's getting back to the intention of the law. So when he says, you have heard it said, do not commit murder. But I say to you, anybody who harbors a hate for their brother in their heart has already committed murder. And what he's getting to is like, what's the intention? What's the meaning of the law that God gives to you? Because the law is
Exactly. Jesus wasn't destroying the Mosaic law, he fulfilled it, but he's also saying, okay, think deeper. What is the intention of those laws?
like a mirror. It shows you how dirty you are. But his critique is he's like, you guys are trying to clean yourself with a mirror. That's stupid. It's just if anything, it's gonna make you more messy. Like, get in the shower. Not what cleans you. The law is what reveals that you're dirty. And so in that sense, I think, if Jesus is a moral example, it actually misses what I think Jesus actually said about what his purpose was, in that you can't do enough to actually live up to the standard that God holds you to. And so if you keep striving, you're actually going to wear yourself out and be exhausted.
Like atheists.
I didn't say you did.
Crazy when they get. This is such an awesome conversation, and I'm sad that it went down the way it went down with you and Billy, but the good thing out of it is that a lot of people became aware of your work, and it's such exhaustive work. It's really amazing what you've done. Thank you so much for these gifts. We will find a great place for them on the wall here. And thanks and let's do it again. And I would love to do it with you and someone who disagrees too. I think it would be a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think it would be really cool.
This has been a pleasure.
My pleasure. How to find all of the different. You have 2 different YouTube channels. You have your own, and you have this new one with Apologetics Canada.
Yeah, so I work for a national not-for-profit and in Canada that is an organization. We want people to have an intellectually robust and a biblically grounded and a faith. We want people to know what they believe and why they believe it. And so we produce materials like we played that clip from Can I Trust the Bible? That's a series that's ongoing. I'm going to be traveling in 2025 to produce more of that content to try to, get this stuff that's all up here out into people so that they can be able to access it.
Do you have 2 of them that are on? Well, there's more, but there's the 2 Can I Trust the Bible versions, 1 and 2. I watch both of those.
Yeah,
today.
awesome.
Yeah, so wesleyhuff.com is my website. Apologeticscanada.com is where, if you want to see where I'm speaking or what we're up to. I'm part of a team that does a lot of this stuff. So those are the 2 places. All my social media handles can be found on wesleyhuff.com.
All right, beautiful.
Awesome.
Thanks very much.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that was it. That was really cool. That was one of the best, I think, to a non-Christian who's seeking episodes that I've ever heard. About just sharing the historicity of the New Testament, the Old Testament. They didn't talk as much the Old Testament, but I mean, you can glean it from the New Testament what the Jews believed. How it's like, yeah, it wasn't an evil god, Yaldabaoth, that the Gnostics believed was evil, trapped us in this world. They didn't get much into that, like Billy Carson, but at the same time, you could see the huge evidence for Christianity. So I hope you guys really enjoyed it. Leave a comment, like, share below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. I'm a full-time missionary and evangelist like Wesley Huff. He's more of a scholar. I'm more of a evangelist. But if you guys want to support my work, there's links in the description below about my ministry, how you can support me, support this channel. I appreciate you guys tuning in. I know it's hard to sit through a 3-hour video, but I think it was very important to talk this because this is like shocking the whole world. Millions are hearing about Jesus they've never heard before, and all the lies about Gnostic gospels are being discounted. So thank you guys for tuning in. And I really pray that you guys are blessed, and may you guys go forth and keep seeking Jesus, and answer God wants you to answer the question, who do you say that I am? Because he is the Son of God, God the Son, and the second person of the Trinity, who did die on the cross for you and rose again from the dead because he defeated your sin, and he can make you into a new person through his blood on the cross. So God bless you guys, and keep praying for Joe Rogan. I'm praying for him too, and pray for Billy Carson as well to be saved, and for Wes to go on more shows